I did.
Should we do the commission reports after the proclamation? Ready to go? Okay, I'd like to call this meeting to order. Join me to pledge of allegiance first.
Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First up, to remind everybody there's sign-in sheets if you want to speak at, we have 2 public hearings, and then there's always room for general public comment. First up, commission report, we have a proclamation, and I believe that Vicki was going to read that for us. Prostate Cancer Awareness Month proclamation.
Yes. Whereas September is National Prostate Cancer Awareness Month, and whereas prostate cancer is the second leading cause of cancer death in men, recognizing that while all men are at risk for prostate cancer, African American and Hispanic men have the highest incidence and mortality of prostate cancer in the world. And whereas there will be an estimated 233,000 new cases of prostate cancer nationally in the year of 2015, and there will be over 29,000 deaths from prostate cancer. In this same year, about 1 man in 6 will be diagnosed with prostate cancer during his lifetime, according to the American Cancer Society. And whereas in 2014, there were 5,400 new cases of prostate cancer diagnosed and 730 deaths from prostate cancer in Washington State. And whereas the Washington State Prostate Cancer Coalition, along with Tacoma Prostate Cancer Support Group, provide programs and materials to advocate and educate men to have an informed discussion with their healthcare provider about prostate cancer by age 50 and by age 45 if they have a family history of cancer. And now, therefore, the City of Shelton Commission does hereby express our support of September as Prostate Cancer Awareness Month in the City of Shelton.
Thanks, that's good information to get out there. I did not know a couple of those things. So, okay, next up we have our commission reports. What we're doing this week. First up will be Commissioner Moore.
Okay. My report is going to actually start at last Saturday when I attended the art at Farmers Market and then cruised through the Smoke and Moe's Hope Benefit and attended the Alley Cats sale at Off the Walls. Shelley Barnett, who is the owner of Off the Walls, is a firecracker, and she's determined to shake the dust off the city, and so she is undergoing great transformations and is hoping to beautify our alleys. We last year voted to put LED lights in the alleys, and so she has a goal to make the alleys something pretty to look at. So good for her. Today I had a housing coalition meeting. Tomorrow I have a staff briefing, and there is an after hours at Heritage Bank that I will be attending. On Friday there is an EDC luncheon, and the program is a presentation from Sierra Pacific, so I'm very interested in attending that. And then on Saturday I will be attending Habitat Takes Flight, which is a great fundraiser for Habitat for Humanity. I'll be volunteering for 4 hours and then having fun for 4 hours. So it's a worthy cause. I would urge everyone who can to attend that event. And that's it.
Okay, thanks. My week is sort of similar. I had an MTA meeting, Mason Transit Authority Board meeting today. I'll meet with the Board of Realtors on Thursday. Friday, I also will go to that EDC luncheon. And Saturday, I'm also volunteering at the Habitat Takes Flight up at Sanderson Field. That's my report, so I think we're done with that. Next up is general public comment. If anybody has anything they want to say now, or they can do it at specific agenda items. First up is Kathy McDowell.
I don't know, are you gonna make some comments on the grant, EPA grant?
We have it for a public comment at that time. Do you want to wait till then?
I wanna wait until you discuss,
Okay,
and then I wanna speak. Thank you.
okay. And Marilyn Vogler.
The same for me.
Same thing. Okay, that makes that easy. So with that all done, we will recess out of the regular commission meeting and recess, or move into a public hearing on an ordinance number 1872. And this is the temporary homeless encampment. And this is going to be Steve, I believe?
That's right. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, Commissioner Moore. This is an item that we've been talking about for, I think, a little over a year now. Leading up to this, we were directed to establish some regulations for tent encampments around the same time as our Human Services Committee was being organized. And the committee has taken the task of looking at the ordinance that was being proposed and making recommendations. And the committee, in essence, really took a real strong, hard look at what was being proposed and tried to come up with something that I think better fit the city of Shelton than some of the regulations that were being passed in larger cities. And we've had a couple iterations of that. There's been some discussion about different aspects of that, and continually we've made refinements. And these current refinements are, I think, really solid, sound ideas that the committees came up with. And there was a lot of, I think, consensus on getting to this point. I must say there's some elements of this staff was a little uncomfortable with, and I'll kind of share along the way here, but the objective of coming up with something that could work in Shelton, I think, has largely been met. And if you look at ordinances in other areas and how they're being implemented, some of those thoughts and ideas are already coming to fruition. For instance, in the city of Tacoma, they have regulations for tent encampment facilities, and they have not had anyone come forward and make an application and utilize those regulations. And there's been some discussion about why that has been the case. And I think it's in part because rather than thoughtfully considering how this will be implemented, I think the regulators and those that were passing those regulations simply wanted to have something that seemed like it was the right thing to do, but not really understanding how the process would work. In that case, the general thought is that having regulations that are limited to 90 days and then requiring the providers to find a new location for that facility is so uncertain that no one in Tacoma is really stepping forward and wanting to be the first one to operate a facility to find out in 90 days that no one is coming behind them to allow this place to be relocated, and doesn't want to get that ball rolling, doesn't want to be put in a position where they're evicting potentially these inhabitants of the tent encampment. So the regulations we have, I think, have tried to steer away from some of those pitfalls and landed on something that we thought could work here if someone wanted to try to implement this and could at the same time minimize the impact on the community. We minimize the size of the larger facilities to 30 persons. We have regulations that allow for a smaller facility under lesser, I guess, conditions, if you will, as well as some separate provisions that established a way to accommodate family members. And that's part of the, I think it's section 2 or 3 in the regulations that are now a separate piece of this. Some of those regulations were things that we batted about and kind of came to I think, well, we arrived at a date, for instance, for the amount of time that a tent encampment could be in one location at 7 months with the ability to request an extension. And largely the thought on that was it does provide a longer time period for potential provider, potential host, as well as a way to gauge how well it's affecting the community. If the community comes forward and says, oh, this isn't working and this is why, we can terminate the agreement or modify the agreement. But it allows for basically 2 facilities to operate in Shelton that could continually host if that's what the community decided to proceed with. There's also provisions that would allow the city to try to find a location that's not on the property of a religious organization that could potentially house a facility, again, with the idea that, can we do this in a manner that's not going to impact the community? So I think with that, I don't know if you have questions about the regulations in particular, but as I said, this has literally been, I don't know, half a dozen meetings with the committee wrangling this language, and I think they did a pretty thoughtful job of bringing this forward.
So what are your major concerns?
Well, I guess there's two main ones. We have regulations now that limit where you can have, for instance, someone that wanted to stay on your property in an RV of 15 days. And I think historically that's been utilized when you have visitors from out of town that want to visit from across the country. They come in their RV, and it's allowed for them to basically park it in the driveway and stay for a period of time. Given the economy and the changes that we've had here in the last 6-7 years, there's been some interest in being able to house folks on a more permanent basis, and we provided regulations that would allow basically a encampment in your backyard with some guidance, some sidebars that staff would administrate. There is a concern that if a number of folks decide to take us up on that, that it could involve a lot of enforcement that we are really not well equipped to manage. So that's a concern. Other than that, I think we've arrived at something that staff can support and would recommend approval of.
So if there are issues, which staff and which department would be the ones that are responsible for making sure that the regulations are met?
That would be our code enforcement officer in planning. And the way we envisioned managing that was to have folks that wish to have that type of arrangement come in, and we would provide them with what the expectations are, similarly to how we manage home occupations, where someone can have a business in their home, provided they follow these certain guidelines. Have the applicants make sure they understand what those are, and then we know where the facility is located, and they've been given a copy of what the expectations are. It's hard to gauge what would happen, but certainly we anticipate that being a little more impactful than someone who may be operating a home office occupation in one of the bedrooms in their house. So there is some concern there.
I don't know if I missed something. Is there a fee for this? Is it like a license or?
It's like a license. There's no fee involved. We would just route that through our process and give them a license, but there's not a fee attached, no.
So there is a permitting process required, but there's no real enforcement, you're saying, unless a neighbor turns in somebody.
Yeah, that we wouldn't be out there trying to see if they're following the guidelines. We would largely rely on complaints if someone isn't following those guidelines. And again, there's 3 tiers here, and the more intense the occupation, the tent encampment, the more regulations there are, and there's more checks and balances. We did have a provision that I think was part of our discussion last time about whether or not we were going to have a warrants background check as part of the procedures. And the city attorney provided the language that's in there currently. And in the end, it was decided that it's not like the case where the hotels were being required to provide a list of their guests as part of a warrants check. In this case, we're telling the occupants up front that we're going to do this. And she felt that that was a pretty broad distinction, and the language that's in there was her recommendation, and staff's comfortable with that.
And then on the section where you can accommodate 2 individuals or 5 extended family members, but you're saying that if somebody comes in their RV, they park in the front yard, but yet you're requiring a screen in the rear yard. If they're trying to do it for family members and they don't have a fence up, how's that kind of jive together?
The distinction is there isn't a time limit on this arrangement. This is something that could go on for months on end. And so we wanted to be more sensitive to the neighbors and the community.
So
and
if they do establish it, then you'd require a fence permit or
some sort of
fence.
screening.
Yeah. And then the other question I had is on allowing fires. I thought that you weren't allowed to burn campfires in the city limits.
I think you are allowed to have recreational fires. I could be wrong.
My concern is if you look at the regulations for that, they have to be 25 feet from any combustible building or materials. So I'm just thinking that that might be difficult on a regular city lot.
Yeah, I can have a problem with allowing fires. It seems like opening ourselves up for a little bit of, craziness.
We certainly weren't intending for that to be a provision that was at odds with any other provisions the city has, or if there are regulations limiting where fires can go or how that's done. That wasn't our intent to deviate from that,
And
certainly.
I guess that's kind of covered in the language that it must be in compliance with all regulations regarding open burning.
That's correct.
So that would cover that.
Okay. Those are all the questions I had. Is there anybody in the public, unless you have any more?
No.
Anybody in the public like to comment, or this is a public hearing, so we have one member of the SPAT team here. Two members, I'm sorry. Marilyn's hiding back there. Okay. If there's no public comment, then we will close the public hearing. And then staff is asking for first reading of this ordinance and placing it on next week's agenda for second reading, if that's where you're at?
I'm fine. Yeah.
I'm too. So can we have that first reading, please?
Ordinance number 1872-0715, first reading. An ordinance of the City of Shelton, Washington, adding a new chapter to Title 20 of the Shelton Municipal Code relating to temporary homeless encampments.
Thanks.
Your Honor.
Okay, very good.
Your Honor,
Yep, I'm sorry.
just, I heard you commenting that there might be some changes that you want to propose for next week, so you're intending to...
Well, I think it was covered in there. As long as you've got the wording in there, they have to make in compliance with all regulations. So if it is not allowed, then I guess that covers it.
Okay.
But maybe I'm unsure about that. I was under the impression there's no burning allowed in the city. I could be wrong.
We can verify what the existing regulations state,
Okay.
as well as the duration regulations that were discussed in the staff report. Don't seem to be properly reflected in the ordinance. I'll have to modify the ordinance language so those mirror up to what was being proposed.
Okay. I think we're still good with moving forward with it, though.
Yes.
Okay, item E is also another public hearing, so we will again recess out the regular and go into public hearing on ordinance number 1874, a vacation. And are you going to have to read all this again?
Oh, Leslie.
And this again is, not again, but this is Mike Michael. Still.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and Commissioners. And hopefully Leslie Ann can do as good a job as she did last time, so.
I bet she will.
Well, we'll keep this fairly short. We talked about this several weeks ago with the first step in this process. Basically, all right-of-way vacations have to follow the process laid out in RCW 3579. That includes an application from the proponents, reviewed by staff, a resolution setting tonight's public hearing, and then the hearing we're having this evening. This whole process for this particular vacation started in October of 2014 from Art and Evan Tozier requesting approximately 4,560 square feet of an alley between Mill Street and Harvard to be vacated. That application has been reviewed by myself, our previous Public Works Superintendent, our Senior Planner, our Assistant Fire Chief, and our Public Works Director, and with no negative impacts found by any of us, with the condition that a utility easement is maintained. That was forwarded to the proponents many months ago and actually was the final step prior to the resolution briefing that we had several weeks ago. Everything is now in place, including a draft easement that we're prepared to have them record for us. At this point, we also completed the public notice that's required under the RCW. It was posted in our normal places, the county auditor's office, our bulletin board downstairs, the post office, and one other one that the top of my head I can't think of at the moment, as well as the site. That all occurred within about a week after the resolution briefing was held back on August 3rd. As you recall, on August 10th, Commission approved the resolution setting this hearing for tonight. And after review, staff's recommendation is to proceed with this vacation by passing the ordinance that we've presented this evening.
Any questions?
No, I think we've been over this. I'm fine with this.
Okay, this is time for any public comment on this proposal. If anybody out there has anything, now's your time. Okay, hearing none, we will close this public hearing. And, yeah, I think this could potentially lead to some development, so
Yes.
we're definitely in favor of this. So staff recommends that we have a first reading tonight and place this on the consent agenda for next week, September 14th. So can we have the first reading? Sorry.
Ordinance number 1874-0915, first reading. An ordinance of the City of Shelton, Washington regarding a petition to vacate the alley between Mill Street and Harvard Avenue, which abuts parcel numbers 320-195-801-016, 320-195-801-015, 320-195-801-1014, 320-195-801-013, 320-195-801-012, 320-195-801-010, 320-195-801-001, 320-195-01003, 320-195-801-005, and 320-195-801-008. One more time.
I couldn't even read that fast.
She's a superstar.
That is great. Okay, thank you, Leslie Ann. That is it for that section. Now, on letter F, we have the consent agenda. And if Commissioner Moore is ready, we'll have that reading.
I am ready.
Consent agenda, vouchers numbered 86643 through 86675 in the amount of $46,032.39. Study session of August 10th, commission meeting minutes of study session of August 10th, 2015, business meeting of August 17th, 2015, study session of August 24th, 2015, and study session of August 31st, 2015.
We have a motion to approve that,
I move that we approve the consent agenda.
and I would second that. Any further questions or comments?
Yep.
Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Old business, and this will be Mr. Goins on our competitive grant from the EPA.
Thank you, Pro Tem. Commissioner Moore, the commission considered this grant request, and there was a request to bring this back for further consideration. Staff has done a fair amount of fact digging on what the grant consists of and how it's implemented. In general terms, the EPA's effort here is to try to help jurisdictions identify sites that would otherwise be ripe for redevelopment, except that they have some sort of brownfield contamination issue that the grants would help the jurisdictions resolve so that the properties can once again be redeveloped and help stir the economy locally. Based on our circumstances here, our income levels and the recent downturn in the amount of jobs here, there was a lot of belief that the city could be well positioned to receive this grant. The timing of this was sensitive, and that was part of the reason why we wanted to move this forward in the fashion we have. We do have a little time, I think, before we're really at a place where we have to come to terms with a decision or wait for another year to make an application. We think that we're probably about 2 weeks away from that point where that would be a struggle. I know there's been a fair amount of interest in this, and Understand you may want to take more comment tonight, but you may want to extend this for another week. Staff's fine with that timing, and I'd be glad to share as much as you'd like. I could tell you what I'm learning now, or share more of that next week, and basically proceed as you will in moving this forward.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with, I know we're waiting on some advice from city attorney too. And I think the public needs a little more time to get around on this and figure it out. So I'm okay with moving it. I think we'll go ahead and have public comment though. Are you okay with that?
Yes.
Okay, let's have some public comment and then both of us can weigh in a little bit if we like. Kathy McDowell.
Kathy McDowell, 326 South Fifth Street. Good evening, Commissioners. I'm coming tonight to comment about the grant for the EPA to come into Shelton and mark all the brownfields. I'm very much against it at this time. We need to find out all the specifics tied to the grant. I have several concerns and questions. If the EPA comes in and marks the brownfields, are we as a city going to have to fund the cleanups? Will the cleanup be a EPA unfunded mandate for the city? In other words, would we be holding the bill for the cleanup? Will we have to clean it up before any new building or businesses are allowed to settle in our town? Will it end up as the sewer project unfunded mandate from the state? Please, I ask you that you find out all the specifics tied to the grant, what this will cost the city. We all know that we want progress, but what is the bill going to be to the expense of the ratepayers? Thank you.
Thank you. Marilyn Vogler.
Marilyn Vogler, 420 East Poplar. I want to explain the origin of this program. The Brownfield Rehabilitation Grant began back in 2002 in a law signed by President Bush. This was the Small Business Liability Relief and Brownfields Revitalization Act. It recognized that some of the prime industrial and commercial locations in many old cities were lying idle because they had originally been developed prior to environmental regulations. They had leaking tanks, they had been used in ways that we would not allow today, and when those businesses closed or moved on or found bigger places, the grounds became idle. Once we put regulations into place, anyone moving back into those primary, very, very well located, very accessible business properties would find themselves with the expense of rehabilitating the brownfield. And so this act was passed so that the EPA can help identify these. And if you go out on the web and look at some of the communities that have gotten the assessment grants, you'll find a series of cleanup grants that follow. There are cleanup grants that follow on, they seem to be in the amount of $200,000 over and over and over, and cities have gotten a half a dozen of these. And so if we're thinking about redeveloping our core, we need to do something like this, and I urge you to go ahead and approve it. Is there risk? Yes. But if we don't do it, I can't imagine anyone coming in and saying, I like that piece of property, and I want to build there, and I will foot the bill for the assessment and the rehabilitation because I want to bring my business to Shelton and you need us. This is something I think the city needs to be proactive about, and I hope you'll approve at least the initial steps of the application for the grant. Thank you.
Is there anybody else who'd like to comment on this? Come on up and sign in, Heidi.
Heidi McCutcheon, 215 West Railroad Avenue. I'm the executive director of the Shelton Mason County Chamber. We have some concerns about this, not necessarily, our message is not, don't do this. Our concern is about the timing, with limited timing, to be able to consider some of the perhaps unintended consequences of this. I may be incorrect, but I thought Steve said earlier that it's something that you may need to wait until next year. With Sierra Pacific working really hard to try and get the mill back up and running to open again in 2017, it just seems like there could be a lot of unintended consequences to do this right now. Historically, I think that there are a number of opportunities that Mason County may have missed for one reason or another. I would really hate to see that happen again. So again, I think it is something that's important, and that it is something that should be identified, but our message to you would be, let's put it off until we can look at it a little bit more clearly, and if we're able to look at it again a year from now, perhaps that's the time to do so. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, I guess we can weigh in if we want, or
Yeah.
if you want to just shuffle it off to next week. Well, I got a couple things.
Okay, you go first, and then I'll decide. You may say.
Yeah, I spent the weekend, this was a big deal. I spent the weekend kind of going around the internet, and I guess I want to relate a story that I think Tracy and perhaps the mayor also found this summer when we went to the AWC conference in Wenatchee, Washington. They had an old steel mill right on the river that was a brownfield site, along with a landfill right next to that. And through these similar grants, they were able to turn that into a phenomenal public market that has now attracted hotels and tax revenue right in the city there. And as Marilyn was saying, this is economic development at its best. I believe that by doing this, we're sending a message that we are responsible citizens for what our predecessors did, and in order to provide economic growth and development, I think we need to address these things. On the other side too, what message does it send to Mark Hall? To get him to clean up his site of slight contamination next to Goose Lake. If we as a city don't want to do this, what makes him not want to do it or push back against us as we force him into these things? There's many economic benefits to this, and just some of the few that I came across of how it impacts our community is the Department of Ecology says harms human health and the environment. It limits job growth and economic development and tax revenue. It reduces surrounding property values. It contributes to neighborhood crime as a site that's underused and left vacant. Cleanup and redevelopment can turn a perceived problem into a community asset. A restored brownfield can stimulate a community's economy, save green space from development, and provide an opportunity for habitat restoration or park creation. A city or town can restore properties to active use, increase jobs in the local tax base, mitigate public health and safety concerns, and improve community image. So that's a pretty strong argument for me. I'm going to wait and I think till next week before we make votes on this, but I'm pretty convinced that this is a good thing, and I don't think anybody knows what the ramifications could be, pro or con. But I think as a responsible leader in this community, the morally right thing to do is to know these things are there. And I would support this at this time unless something else comes up from our city attorney that would, scare me off a little bit, because I do consider the economic impact of the community. And this really sways me to the side of erring on the favor of taking the grant and moving forward with it. So that's all I'll say for right now.
I'm sure that we will have more comments next week, and then it will be very interesting to hear what the attorney has to say. I did a number of searches on the internet. There's a lot of information there, and frankly, I didn't find anything on there that was a negative for this. It tends to spur economic revitalization and growth. It is also, as I said last week, it's helpful to developers if this study is already done, they know what is there, and so they're not having to shell out that money, as well as the other development fees. They may have to do the cleanup, but they will be aware of what the cleanup is. So I'm glad we have another week to think about it and to do some study, and I would urge everyone to really do an internet study of this issue and maybe come back excited about some of the potential, because where there are funds going out for these type of grants, there are funds going out for grants for cleanup, which is really a positive thing and could be really welcome, and would also give us maybe peace of mind. For years, we've heard about horror stories of possible polluted sites. It would be nice to know for sure, one way or another. We can either avoid them or we cannot worry about them anymore. So, next week.
To be fair, the mayor emailed a statement to City Administrator Dave O'Leary, so I think that should be read into the record as long as we're commenting on it.
Concerning the EPA grant, I cannot support this motion due to lack of information about any possible unintended consequences.
I got a couple more things I just came across that I wanted to fill in too. Marilyn referred to the brownfields tax, she referred to the 2002 law. There's also a tax incentive that I've come across that environmental cleanup costs are fully deductible in the year they are sustained, rather than capitalized and spread over time. So there's a nice tax incentive for a property owner to do this in their business model. It also goes on to talk about the Brownfield Revitalization and Environmental Restoration Act, which Marilyn referred to. It provides grants for inventorying, characterizing, assessing, remediating, and conducting planning related to brownfield sites. Defines a brownfield site and also exempts from liability under CERCLA, which I'm not sure what that is. I'm sure it's some sort of a EPA offshoot. It exempts property owners that may have had lands contaminated by nearby property possessed by their owners. So there's great incentive there. I think that we shouldn't be afraid of this. I'm sure that there's the fear out there, but I don't think we should run this on a fear level. I think we should embrace it and look at it and take advantage of when we're offered grants, as most of the community wants us to. So with that, unless Steve has any more comments, or Commissioner Moore.
I just had one more question for Steve. Were we able to determine if the study that is done only on vacant or underutilized property, or is it on going businesses, going industries?
Yeah, to expand on that, we talked last week about the city acting as a sole applicant or potentially partnering with the Port or Mason County. In part, the answer would be it would depend on that partnership. But our understanding is the applicant has the ability of deciding which parcels are going to be considered. We can ask them to consider all parcels within our sphere, or focus on the downtown, which I think was mainly our objective, or something else. So it sounds like we can customize that to whatever we think is probably going to benefit us in terms of triggering economic development.
One of the concerns the mayor brought up last week was that potentially 25 businesses could be closed depending on what was found there. But if I'm understanding correctly, a business that's operating wouldn't necessarily fall under this scope of work.
That's our understanding. The idea was to try to find a way to spur redevelopment on sites that are having some sort of problem, and typically that's a vacant building or maybe a cleared site. What generally tends to happen is if a property becomes available, but there's a question of whether it's clean or there might be some contamination, you have to do this phase 1 or potentially a phase 2 report. Typically, a lender requires those things. And a developer or someone who's interested in purchasing the property, that's usually one of the first hurdles they encounter. So the idea was to try to, at a minimum, have the grant pay for some of those initial studies so someone's not taking the money out of their pocket to do that study. It certainly wasn't the intent to try to cause redevelopment on a site that's already an active business.
Okay.
So in terms of focusing that would be staff's recommendations to try to focus on the sites where we think there could be some redevelopment opportunity.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
Good point. Okay, I guess we'll move this on to old business then next week. That's okay with everybody? You look puzzled, Dave. Is there? Okay. Okay, we'll move on to new business then. Comprehensive plan update, and I believe this will be Steve Goins, Community and Economic Development Director.
Thank you again. And this is the first of what will be a series of briefings and discussions about our comprehensive plan update. I wish this was a more thorough report for you today. We've struggled to bring that first 3 sections, 3 elements of our comprehensive plan forward. We have a portion that was in the packet, the introduction section tonight. Wanted to give you an update on some of the things that are being considered for the land use and housing elements, and as well as a sort of emerging change that's been discussed in the last couple weeks. The draft introduction is a sort of a kickoff here. Staff looked at the introduction chapter, and what we found, first of all, was this was largely kept intact from the initial creation of the comprehensive plan from the 90s. It hasn't changed a lot in almost 20 years. So we kind of took a fresh look at it, and one of the things we thought, and this is sort of the overarching theme of that particular section, is there seemed to be a lot of language that belongs somewhere else. We really condensed it and shortened it, made it a much easier read, and sort of tried to give ourselves a framework for what the other elements we're going to talk about, rather than specifically talking about housing, just some of what our thoughts are in terms of what we are trying to achieve as a community at large. So it's largely a rewrite, and we're open for your suggestions and comments. I wasn't looking for any specific language tonight. Really just wanted to introduce it to you and have a conversation in the coming weeks. Once you've had some time to look at it, thoughtfully consider what it says, and have a dialogue and some feedback. The second item is really just an update on the request of the port. When we went through the checklist, when we described what the mandated elements of this needed to be that were part of the Growth Management Act compliance, we also mentioned that there was interest of the port to consider a UGA expansion that would modify our boundary to include a portion of the outer harbor, which would include all of the marina, which currently straddles that line, and it's caused some concern and troublesome means for regulating the marina between the city and the county having joint jurisdiction. So that process of changing that boundary and eventually incorporating that into the city, the county has decided to move forward with that piece of that UGA boundary adjustment. We will, instead of taking the lead on that particular piece, we will be sort of tracking that and incorporating that into our update as the county completes their process. The county is the body that ultimately approves the urban growth area boundary, so certainly that's not inappropriate for the county to consider that. I think their reason for taking that on in part was to accommodate some timing concerns the port had. We were just not in a position to try to accomplish that this year. We were trying to focus on the larger update that's really going to come forward in its entirety in 2016. So we anticipate that moving forward, maybe at a different pace than we initially were discussing, but not really a change in terms of what the request is. There was a discussion internally about a land use change that before now hasn't been discussed. And I brought a map in case you want to look at this in particular. There's a section of lands in the city that are under the Bonneville power lines. The particular area that staff was focusing on is around the Brockdale, Johns Prairie intersection and proceeding kind of easterly there. It's a pretty wide area of what's largely undeveloped land that is, it's hindered in its ability for what it can be used for because of the power lines and the power line easements. But there may be an opportunity there. Currently, that land is zoned neighborhood residential. That's compatible with some of the uses surrounding it, but it may be the case that it's really hard to develop as neighborhood residential. You're not going to certainly get any high density in that area. You're going to allow some development on the fringes of it, but under the power lines, you're probably limited just allowing parking, no structures, that kind of thing. But there are other uses that may be better served for, particularly recreational uses, grass fields, that kind of thing is what other communities do in response to those kind of easements. So we wanted this to have a dialogue about what might be a more suitable zoning under those power lines and just see if we can do better than just zoning it residential and hoping something happens. We have a need to amend our population projection. We have a initial number that the county and the city have been working toward. When we adopted a population projection in our last update, you may recall that the economy was pretty hot. There seemed to be a lot of activity, and certainly the city was growing. Not long after that, the economy changed, and growth has not been what was projected during that time, particularly in portions of the county. So we have I think it's a more conservative number that we're trying to target. But at the same time, there's been a movement to try to consider shifting more of the population that's occurring in Mason County to more urban areas or certainly condensing it in some manner. Green Diamond Resources has came forward with a proposal where they would sort of transfer some of the density that's allowed on some of their forest lands and consolidate that in certain parts of the county. They've requested consideration for allowing some expanded density in the neighborhood of Goldsboro Creek area west of 101, and this is lands that are basically adjoining the Mark Hall development to the south. Certainly staff has long believed that long-term that seemed appropriate for some sort of residential development along that northern boundary. There's a the total holding that Green Diamond has is pretty substantial there. It's bisected by Goldsboro Creek and the rail corridor. There's a fair-sized canyon that is part of that, some pretty steeply sloped areas, particularly on the north side. The area that we're talking about for this consideration is that most northern area that would be directly adjacent to the Hall development. There's some pretty prime view land in that area, and it does seem appropriate long-term for residential use. It's certainly something that I think has been talked about for quite some time is in conjunction with the Hall development. But it's currently not in our UJ, it's certainly not in the city. Green Diamond wanted to consider adding that as a component here, and that was something new, and really just looking for a dialogue about that potential tonight. That might shift some of those population numbers that we've had a discussion with the county about, but I think the county's amenable to revisiting that. The concern staff had was making those kind of adjustments on a process where we're already struggling to meet the time objective that the growth management is requiring of all the cities that are in this cycle. We were anticipating more help from the state in terms of dollars to help assist with this endeavor than we're actually anticipating receiving now. There was a proposal made by the state to provide grant dollars summing $18,000 over the biennium, $9,000 for the first biennium budget, an additional $9,000 in what is now the current budget. By all appearances, that second $9,000 doesn't seem to have been adopted. It doesn't seem to be in the state's budget. So that's less dollars that we'll have to do transportation studies and other elements that we anticipate having. What we're hoping is that if you're comfortable moving ahead with this, that we can ask Green Diamond to assist us with that, which will help us get back on the time track we want to get, and maybe help the county as well. So there could be a positive outcome in that regard if we can get some assistance to help us with our process and incorporate that, that request at the same time. I don't know if I have anything else to report on. It was really just a kind of a first touch on, like I said, what's going to be a series of discussions here. We'll be bringing sections of this a bit at a time over the next year, as well as regulations that need to be changed to implement some of these different policy changes we have over time. That concludes my report.
I don't really have any questions or comments at this time. Like you say, as you bring stuff forward to us, it is intriguing about the piece of the Green Diamond one, though. That's not in the city limits, so we'd have to somehow figure out a transportation system to
That
get
certainly
to
is.
that. They're landlocked at this point, right?
It's pretty landlocked. It almost requires being incorporated into the hall development
Yeah.
to be utilized. I think Green Diamond's consideration is that that land is pretty close to an urban area. It makes a lot of sense to abandon a forest practice in some of these areas, and the density trade-off would help them accommodate that desire, as well as lock down some of the other lands that they want to put covenants on for long-term commercial forests for the foreseeable future. So in terms of meeting growth management objectives, that certainly squarely fits in that. It's mainly a timing and budget issue for us.
When you were talking about the land that's zoned residential under the Bonneville power lines and doing a switch over to possibly parks or recreational land, do we have to do a switch, a percentage switch somewhere else to keep the residential, available residential the same?
That's a good question. We would have to do, as part of that land use analysis, a determination of just how much land is zoned residential compared to this new population projection that we'll be working on with the county. And that's part of that analysis that isn't complete. It's likely that because we're lowering our projection that we might need less residential land. So certainly that's something that we could consider. Is that a good location to change that from residential to something else? In turn, with this Green Diamond request, Mason County may be asking Shelton to take a larger share of the growth in the county for this 20-year planning horizon. We anticipate that would be as a result of accepting the Green Diamond lands. So it's sort of a complicated answer, but we need to do that analysis, and that's part of what the update does.
Okay.
It kind of readjusts what we have based on more current information, and maybe the most significant thing in this update is the realization that the growth that we were experiencing in the 1990s and early 2000s isn't happening and probably isn't coming back anytime real soon.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
I'm good.
Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. Next up under new business is purchase of a car. I assume this is Vicki Luck.
Good evening, Commissioners. Back when we had our retreat, we had brought a proposal to you requesting a car that would be used for the administration and finance departments. And part of the justification for that we presented at that time was we have 2 IT staff now that provide support to the treatment plant and some of the satellite plants and stuff, so that they go out there quite often, and this would be a car that they could utilize, as well as our staff, admin and finance, for training opportunities and those sorts of things. And some of the training is in Eastern Washington, and staff has a little bit of a difficult time getting their personal vehicles and traveling over there for a 2 or 3 day conference. And we also had shared a vehicle with Public Works and CED, and so, sometimes difficult to take it for a very long period of time for a 3 or 4 day conference. At the retreat, it was prioritized and it was considered one-time funding, and so it was placed number 3 on the list. Then they finance department completed the accounting, and there were reserves in each department's received what they had left over from their budgets, and finance and administration had enough money to go ahead and request purchase of the car this year out of the reserves that we had from the 2014 budgets. So we're asking permission to buy the car now, and then we would remove the request from the 2016 list, which would maybe, free up some one-time monies for some of the other requests that came through. Do you have any questions?
I see you have two different amounts here, which you can do either one.
We looked at the, finance, I should say, looked at the state contracts and the cars with a good price. There was, I think, a regular car, something like a Chevrolet or something like that, Malibu, was around $18,000, and it was $24,000 for a hybrid. So, we were looking for commission direction. I think everybody wants to save gas these days, and get the most economical car possible. So that's kind of what the $18,000 was, and the $24,000 was for the hybrid.
And you have the $24,000 in reserves.
We
You can go
did.
as high as that.
Kathy and I are very good at pinching pennies. Oh, she laughed. Oh, there you are. Yes, so we're pretty good at saving as much as we can. Did you have anything you'd like to add to that? We do have a lot of trainings and things that our staff need to go to for, keeping up on all the regulations and things like that.
So then, would it be a requirement that staff would take that car rather than their own car?
Yes,
So the mileage reimbursement, wouldn't it be a consideration at that point?
exactly. And right now it's 56 and a half, something like that,
Something like that.
per mile.
So if the car's available, that would be the first selection, then no mileage reimbursement. But if that car is needed by another, already reserved for another function, then they would be allowed to use their own and mileage if they have a car they can use.
How often do you anticipate the car would be used? Like every day or once a week or?
No, I think that probably 3 or 4 times a week between the trainings and our IT staff that go out to the different locations to provide support for that.
Is there an old car now? Do you guys have an old car?
There is a,
Man car.
G-Man.
there's a car that is shared between Public Works, Community and Economic Development, Finance, and Administration. And I think it was a police car.
Yes, an old police car.
I've ridden in it. It is kind of a lowrider.
And I think it has.
So would that car would stay it would stay in use, so we wouldn't be retiring it?
I don't believe so. And the request hasn't been to retire that, no.
Okay.
Well, I like the idea of saving, best bang for the buck. The hybrid seems pretty, wasn't there a state mandate a while ago that we're supposed to go to electric anyway at some point? They were trying to do that to everybody.
I haven't heard that one, but
I would be okay with the hybrid, as far
would
as
go with the
if the
hybrid?
budget holds it, you got that in reserves, it makes sense to save as much of that as we can, get the best deal.
Would
Okay.
that car be available to commissioners going?
I believe we consider the commissioner's administration.
Yes.
Because I
So,
usually
yes.
rent a car because
Yes.
it's cheaper than getting the mileage.
Right,
reimbursement.
absolutely.
So,
We're requesting placement of this on the consent agenda for next week.
do we need to tell you the dollar amount, or?
If you want to tell us we can, go for the hybrid, that would be good. Direction on the model, I guess,
Yeah,
for the most economical hybrid.
I think if you have the money and reserves and you've made a case for it, and I'm assuming you're going to get the best buy that you can.
Absolutely.
Yes, we've been researching it, and we'll get the best buy. But also, we would need authorization for the city administrator to make any necessary budget mods. Also.
Normally, we don't do this, but I know that Toby's an expert on hybrids, isn't he? So,
Is there a sign-up opportunity to comment on this?
well, there is at the end of the general public comment time.
I think I have something to offer, but I'll wait.
Okay.
Mike has.
Well, I think we're both in agreement
Yep.
to go for that, so I guess we need a
Thank you.
motion on that.
Thank you very much.
Well, it's kind of exciting. I mean, none of my cars have made it into the 21st century yet, okay. I move that we approve a purchase of a vehicle for the Administration and Finance Departments to be placed on the consent agenda and authorize for September 14th, 2015, and authorize the city administrator to make the necessary budget modifications.
I would second that. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you.
Get your car. Okay, on to letter I, administration report. Wastewater treatment plant rehab. Is this Mr. Michael?
That would be me.
Okay.
Just a quick update in issue of fair reporting here. Last week, the commission under consent signed the final acceptance form for one of the wastewater treatment plant contracts. This form has created clerical issues for us in the past related to retainage and the various ways retainage can be handled under the contracts. It got us on this one. We reported to the commission signed for $173,192.28 as the final amount paid, which is technically true because that's how much the contractor's been paid. The piece that this form left off, and we are looking at changes to the form to help this, is the retainage of $8,358.70 that we did not report to the commission for a total contract earned by the contractor of $181,550.99. And so we have administratively made notes on the form in the file, but wanted to report to the commission that slight change in the form that they signed last week.
Okay. Thank you. Any further administrative reports? Okay, now we come to our final general public comment, and Mr. Kevin is signed up. Oh, yeah, that's right, Toby Kevin.
I am Toby Kevin, 709 Terrace View Drive. Good evening. What struck me, first off, by way of background, for 15 fun-filled years, I was a cost analyst at Boeing. I know it stretches the imagination. And I submit that to make a decision based on purchase price is to overlook an awful lot of information. For one thing, as Commissioner Olson pointed out, I have been an owner of a hybrid for quite some time, and I think if you look at maintenance costs, you'll find that they are shockingly different from ordinary. As an example, to change the oil on my Prius yesterday, I spent $86. And it's more like 35 when you change the oil on a Chevrolet. But you look at purchase price, yes, you look at utilization, and then you look at resale. Look at the whole thing. And somebody on the staff, I'm sure, is smart enough to do that. But if there isn't somebody, I'd be happy to lend some of my experience to the things that you look at. Might end up that the one that's 18 grand is a better buy, might not. But I think it's worth looking at. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Final call for public comment. If not, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. Now it's time for administration final touches, but Dave says there's none?
No, there is one. Next week, and it might be on the looking ahead, it may not, we're going to revisit the budget. We had, the last work we did on the budget was in our retreat in late March, early April, one or the other, and then we had a city commission meeting, study session after that where we worked on it. This is the last meeting and that process, one of the things we said is if we had any other budget issues to bring forward, they needed to be brought up along in a study session and also be considered along with the other budget items that were prioritized in that meeting, in that priority setting meeting. So we'll be back next week in order to be able to do that process, and then we'll take the results of that meeting into the is it the preliminary budget, Kathy? That's what it's called. Okay, the overview. Essentially, we're going to take what comes forward and add it all up, and we're going to be out of balance. Similar process to what we've done before, but then we'll use our priority list in order to be able to sort one thing from another. So we're going to ask you to take another look at the priorities, and we also have additional details. The budget submittals early in this year were deliberately kind of swags, and now all those submittals and everything that's been done in the meantime has been formalized so that we have a much higher level of confidence, and some of the numbers are different. So anyhow, it'll be interesting as part of the new process, as was buying the car. That was the principle that we have is to make our departments more entrepreneurial, so to the extent that they can save money, they don't spend all the money that's in their budget. They can use that to solve their own problems, and it's kind of pushing responsibility for these issues down into the departments rather than having them always come to the commission to say, "Oh, please solve my problem," and this gives them a chance to resolve their own. And so I'm glad the way that went, and that should work that way, and it should work that way for other departments as well. So that concludes staff's report. And is there any other touches? I had to remember what process I was in. That's it, Your Honor. Thank you.
All righty, that concludes the meeting. Our next meeting will be Monday, September 14th at 2 p.m. right in the back room here. Thanks for coming.